Hi, good evening, everyone. Good morning in the West Coast of the United States. Good afternoon in a lot of the places that are watching us tonight. I'm Jay Shofet. Welcome to another webinar, a live webinar of the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. Very excited tonight to host my friend and colleague Gidon Bromberg, who from Echo Peace Middle East. He's going to be talking to us about a big deal. It's called the Green-Blue deal or the Blue-Green deal. I'm never really sure, but I guess it depends on your perspective. But it's a big deal. Gidon is already with us. Thank you so much for being here, Gidon. I appreciate it very much.
It's a real pleasure, Jay. What a great opportunity and a great honor.
Welcome to all of our guests. Please let us know who you are and where you are in the chat feature. I'm hoping that's enabled somehow. Nobody said hello yet. Want to thank all of our supporters and board members from our affiliates abroad, and of course in Israel. Welcome everybody from already we see from Germany. Maggie and Leanne in New Jersey, our longtime former board chair, and very special couple in Northern Jersey and New York City and Scottsdale, Arizona, and Maine and Toronto and Virginia. We already have 7-8 different states represented in our first 8 people. So thank you. And a couple of countries. So 3 countries so far. Norway. So great to have you here. In Haifa and all over. Anyway, I don't know how you feel, Gidon, but we're at the end of or the beginning of another week, but that last week was quite the week in Israel. Maybe we'll touch on some of those issues that came up this past week. Meanwhile, I'll thank David Amichai doing back office as usual from his home in Jerusalem. I'm in my home in Tel Aviv. Gidon, you live in Tel Aviv too, yes?
I'm Tel Aviv based, correct.
Tel Aviv based. So thanks very much. We're still letting people join. We upwards of over 55 people on the call, and we're live on Facebook as well. You can share. Of course, the webinar will be recorded. If you miss it, it'll be on our website tomorrow. We'll be sending out a link to it. So please let your friends and interested parties know. But we're going to get going in just a second as people join. I always just so heartwarmed to see people from so many places, from all over Israel, from all over North America, from the UK always, and Europe, and sometimes Asia, and it's very heartwarming. Nobody really from Australia though, Gidon. I don't know what time it is there now. It's probably the middle of the night or something, right?
It is in the middle of the night. Yes, it must be 6 o'clock in the morning, actually.
Oh, well, the early risers in Australia. I don't know. We should really talk. I've always wanted to talk to you about that. Getting some Australian support and from our people abroad. But anyway, I think we can get going now. 4 minutes after the hour. Allow me to formally introduce Gidon Bromberg, the founder of Friends of Earth Middle East, a tripartite organization which has become Friends of Echo Peace Middle East. Gidon will tell you more about that. I just want to say I've known Gidon for a while now, really since I became a professional in the environmental movement in 2011. I was chosen and honored to direct the Green Environment Fund, a philanthropic consortium of foundations that pooled their resources for the environment in Israel, and they founded an important foundation in Israel that existed here for 15 years. It closed 9-10 years ago, but I directed it for 3 years. And when I started the job, I'd been involved in environmental activism my whole life, but when I got the job, one of the first people I met was, I was going to say I sat down with Gidon, but he didn't let me sit down. Gidon took me on a full day tour to learn all about the stuff we're going to be hearing about today. And he took me to the Jordan River and almost made me jump in, but didn't. But he showed me photos he might show today of some mayors in the water of the Jordan River. But I learned a lot about the water economy of Israel, about Israel's freshwater problems and our Well, 10 years ago, we were already talking about desalination. 11 years ago, we were already talking about desalination. 14 years ago, I think it was 13. I don't know. We were already talking about desalination and stuff, but I don't know back then, Gidon, if I'd asked you, will and how will this green blue deal happen and what will change in the next decade, if you could have predicted that or not, because you've been in this a long time, since at least the early 90s and probably before. But please, welcome to our webinar series. And if you just, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to this, and then we'll just get right into the issues and your presentation. And we'll have time for questions and answers later. Friends and people abroad, and in Israel, you can write your questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom. That will help us towards the end, and we'll get them to Gidon. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jay, and it's a real pleasure to be on this important webinar. I have been a co-founder and I've been the Israeli director of EcoPeace since day one, since the end of 1994. And for those of you that are, perhaps doing your, studies in different locations around the world, my story is a wonderful story because the idea of creating EcoPeace comes out of my thesis, a paper that I wrote in Washington, D.C. I did a master's in international environmental law in Washington at the time that the peace negotiations were taking place, not far from where I was studying. This is
the Oslo peace negotiations.
Yes, the Oslo Accords.
To remind our viewers who.
The Oslo Accords and the peace agreement that was signed between Israel and Jordan back in 94. And I simply asked the question, given that peace was breaking out, since we were, certainly I was certain that that's it, we're going to see a new Middle East and we're not going to have to worry about a conflict anymore. I asked the question, well, was peace going to be good for the environment? And the conclusion of my thesis was that, well, environment perhaps is really not on the political agenda. And one of the recommendations of my study was, well, perhaps if civil society, Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian, and Egyptian, also at that time, were to get together, perhaps we could make sure that peace is not only between people, but also with nature. So that's the raison d'etre of the establishment of EcoPeace. Clearly, EcoPeace has had to reinvent itself, in fact, several times since then, because peace never broke out, tragically. We're still struggling to find that peace that I think we all desire. Sometime before the Second Intifada, so in the late 1990s, we asked ourselves, are we still relevant? And we can, and this is our board and our staff. By that time, we were no longer inclusive of Egyptians. Unfortunately, our Egyptian partners left, and we remained. And we were the first, and sadly, we remain until today, the only regional organization that exists in any field that brings together Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians together. We're one board. I'm the Israeli co-director, coming out of our Tel Aviv office. We have a Palestinian co-director, Nada Majdalani, out of our office in Ramallah. Jordanian co-director, Yana Abu Talib, in our office in Amman. About 20 staff in each office. Every staff person having a parallel staff person working with them, because our whole focus is transboundary. And in the late 99s, we really had to reinvent ourselves because we had to, clearly overdevelopment was no longer taking place. Peace hadn't broken out. And we came to understand that we're an example, that through the environment, we're an example of actually how to build common interest, how to build trust, and hopefully through that, how to build peace. And it's relevant again, to this talk today because the elephant in the room is the climate crisis. And at EcoPeace, and this is going to be the focus of my presentation, the Green Blue Deal, which is a report that was written by Ecopeace in 2020 really helped galvanize the reinvention of Ecopeace again through the climate crisis and understanding that the climate crisis doesn't just hit one country in a particular way; it hits a region in a particular way. So, if we're to survive the climate crisis as a region, if we're to survive the climate crisis as Israelis, we're going to have to realize that we have to work together because the response is not good enough to be just national. It's going to have to be regional. So let me share a PowerPoint that I'll go through, and hopefully this will spell things out and be the opportunity to ask questions as soon as I finish. And please, Jay, please give me a heads up if you want me to stop, so that we have enough time for questions here. So as I said, at Ecopeace, we launched the Green Blue Deal in 2020, and right from the beginning, it attracts tremendous attention. The Green Blue Deal is an Ecopeace concept that is really built on the ideas coming from, on the one hand, the European Union with the European Green Deal, which is a European-wide response to the climate crisis, and to the U.S. administration's response to the climate crisis, at least under the Biden administration, which is broader, which is beyond sort of the focus of one state. And right from the beginning, we're able to attract the Foreign Minister of Finland to our presentation, Her Royal Highness the Princess of Belgium, Dan Shapiro, the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, as an example. Just as a bit of a background, when we look at the MENA region, if you can see my cursor, we're the most water scarce part of the world, the Middle East and North Africa. We're also, if you look at the second slide, at the second photo to the right, these are the different conflicts that are taking place in our region. And although water is often not the key issue behind these conflicts, water scarcity is an underlying issue. It's one of several issues that foster many of the conflicts in our region. And then when we look at the climate crisis, and this is a graph prepared by Tel Aviv University together with a German university, we can see that the summer months that presently spread over some 4 months will increase by some 50% by the end of the century. The figures, the models of the climate crisis, of climate change, tell us that our region has already seen a close to 2-degree increase in temperature. In fact, those of you that are from Israel or were visiting here just 2 summers ago experienced, perhaps by bathing in the Mediterranean, the highest temperature that we've ever recorded in the Eastern Mediterranean, 32 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees higher than ever recorded. We're expecting an additional 4 to 7 degree increases in temperature should we as humanity not stop the climate crisis. We're expecting anywhere between 20 to 40% reduction in precipitation, particularly as we go further east in the areas of Jordan. Yet, from an environmental perspective, this is one of my favorite maps. This is a map of watersheds, and it makes a complete mockery of the borders, the man-made political borders that really get in the way if we're to manage, if we're to survive the climate crisis. The green watersheds make no distinction between Israel and the West Bank, or Israel or Jordan. And of course, here in the south, there's no distinction between, here Israel and Gaza, and here in the south, there's no distinction between Israel and Jordan. In fact, what in Israel we call the Yarkon water basin, starts in Ramallah and ends in Tel Aviv. And if we won't know how to cooperate, how to manage these water basins, then we're not going to manage to the detriment of us all. One of the key lessons that we draw from, again, is the European experience. And in the Green Blue Deal that we authored and launched, we were very much focused on solutions. And I think many of us understand the challenges that we face, but at Ecopeace we're very solution oriented. And we looked at Europe after World War II as an example of perhaps how can we draw from that experience. And we drew from the experience of the coal and steel agreement that was signed by France and Germany, later expanded to the Benelux and other European countries, but countries that were at war for hundreds of years. And the last thing they wanted to do after World War II was to actually cooperate. And here the US leadership basically forced European countries to work together on the two engines of the economies critical to Europe at that time, coal and steel. And we simply asked the question, well, what's the coal and steel that's relevant to the Levant, that's relevant to our region in the midst of a climate crisis? And Jay, you mentioned Israel's leadership in desalination. And we immediately understood that through a research project that we undertook for several years, we understood that the potential of desalination is a game changer in the midst of the climate crisis as far as adaptation is concerned. Our populations are rising. We need to deal with that too. But given that, and there's decreased rainfall precipitation, and there's, at least in Israel, very high efficiencies, desalination is no longer a privilege, it's a necessity. But what our research highlighted was that desalination on the Mediterranean coast, already extensively taking place in Israel, but also proposed in large scales in Gaza, provide the most accessible and the cheapest manufactured additional water, not only for Israelis, Palestinians, but also for Jordanians. And in fact, that we on the Mediterranean have the comparative advantage to produce desalinated water to supply the adaptation water needs of our three peoples at cheapest prices. And that's because the Mediterranean is about 100 kilometers from the furthest largest cities of our region. From Tel Aviv to Amman, it's roughly 100 kilometers across. While Jordan has a sea, but it's 300 kilometers from the Gulf of Aqaba in the south all the way to Amman, another 100 kilometers, 400 kilometers in total to their second largest city, Irbid. And we also, through our research, were able to show that, on the other hand, Jordan has the comparative advantage to produce large-scale renewable energy. And that's what the photo here, so that's a mitigation measure, a climate mitigation measure, because Jordan has vast desert areas where it can produce renewable energy at price that Israelis and Palestinians would only dream of, and at scale that's simply not possible in Israel or the Palestinian territories. And that's one, in the West Bank, much due to conflict. Gaza, there's no room, but even in Israel, with the Negev is mostly captured. Half the Negev is military training areas, the other half are declared nature reserves, and in any event, we don't want to see more and more solar fields just taking away valuable open spaces, while Jordan has vast desert areas of quite low environmental value in comparison, and can produce the renewable energy needs in addition, it's not instead of, but in addition to renewable energy that Israelis and Palestinians need to produce. And if this harnessing the sun and the sea, this water energy exchange rings a bell, well, In fact, an agreement was signed a bit more than a year ago between Israel, Jordan, and the UAE under the auspices of John Kerry from the United States. Ecopeace was the engine behind this, bringing this to the government of Israel, bringing this to the government of Jordan, bringing this to the private sector in the Emirates, and also bringing on board Secretary Kerry. And then the governments indeed negotiated a deal, a memorandum of understanding that was signed in December of last year at the Sharm Climate Conference. And we hope that we're going to see an actual purchase agreement on water being sold, being produced on the Mediterranean by Israel and moved east to Jordan, and renewable energy being produced in Jordan and being sold to Israel. We also hope that there will be a parallel agreement between Jordanians and Palestinians where renewable energy will be produced in Jordan to meet additional needs for renewable energy for the Palestinians as well. So, on a positive note, we see how civil society advocacy, civil society research combined with advocacy can really make a difference. And the government of Israel and the government of Jordan have both said that this agreement, which is called Project Prosperity, Blue and Green, is the most important agreement signed between the two countries since the signing of that peace treaty that I mentioned earlier, signed in 1994. The second, or a follow-up to that agreement that we're currently working on is looking at some of the areas of Area C of the West Bank to produce renewable energy by Palestinians, for Palestinians, and use the grid in Israel to carry that electricity across. It's called wheeling the electricity to meet some real needs of additional electricity for Gaza, for the population, for desalination purposes, for the treatment of sewage in Gaza, and I'll come back to that in some further slides. The second pillar of the Green Blue Deal is what I tried to convince Jay to jump into, and that's the rehabilitation of the Jordan River, which runs in its lower stretch from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. It's only a 100-kilometer stretch. It was never the Mississippi. It was never more than 100 meters wide. But much due to conflict, the Jordan River has been turned into, sadly, little more than a sewage canal. And 2 kilometers south of the Sea of Galilee, some 95% of what used to flow either from the Sea of Galilee, from the Israeli side, or from the Yarmouk, from the Syrian and Jordanian side, has all been captured. And what's left in the Jordan River is a little more than sewage and agricultural runoff and fish farm waste, a real disgrace. We've lost about half of the biodiversity of the river. And this is a river that, as the people of the book, as the Abrahamic people, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, we've turned this river, of great importance to our three Abrahamic traditions, whether a river of miracles under Judaism, the place where under Christianity, Jesus is baptized, and 4 of the companions to the Prophet Muhammad are buried on the eastern bank, yet we've managed under conflict to turn this into a little bit more than a sewage canal. And our second pillar of the Green Blue Deal is all about rehabilitating this river. And we've done here too a lot of research, a lot of advocacy. Here too, SB&I have been very active with us on the Israeli side of the Jordan River to get public support. There's no raw sewage flowing anymore from the Israeli side to the river, but there's very little fresh water coming from the Sea of Galilee. We've been working for more than 15 years towards the rehabilitation of the river. But we've highlighted under climate crisis that there's even more reason why we need to focus on rehabilitating the river, because as this part of the region gets drier and drier, it's a breadbasket, It's the area where most of the food of Jordan is produced. Much of Palestinian agricultural production is here. And as the temperatures, also important for Israel, but as the temperatures increase, the productivity of the Jordan Valley as a breadbasket is being negatively impacted. And that means the livelihood. We have 800,000 people here living in the valley. The livelihood of these people are increasingly under risk. And we don't want to see, I won't go into detail now, but some of the background for the uprising in Syria is related to the failure of the Assad government to respond to the climate crisis and farmers losing their livelihoods. We can't afford, as a region, for 800,000 people here to lose their livelihoods. And what we have at Ecopeace have highlighted that if we rehabilitate the river and use the river again as a natural water carrier, we can benefit with alternative livelihoods of tourism and attract tens of millions of people from around the world, particularly from the Abrahamic tradition, to visit the region and help develop a much broader economic activity beyond agriculture in the valley. And the fact that Israel will be selling water to Jordan, we're proposing that rather than, in fact, a new desalination plant is proposed to be built here in Emek Hefer, and that's going to supply the water for Amman. We don't want to see a pipe. We want to see utilization of existing infrastructure, the reversal of the national water carrier in Israel, which has already been completed, and then using the River Jordan and rather than building a pipe and as close past the baptism site, which is south of Jericho, connected to an existing pipe, which is bringing water to Amman from the King Abdullah Canal. I can go into more details here, but we see actually the sale of water under Project Prosperity Blue from Israel to Jordan as an opportunity if we get the sewerage out. And the good news from this article that appears and this photo that appears also from last year's Sharm climate conference is that Israel and Jordan have signed an agreement saying that they're recommitting themselves to rehabilitate the River Jordan. And here too, Ecopeace has been a key player in convincing through our Amman office, the government of Jordan, through our Israel office, through our Tel Aviv office, the Israeli government, but we're also working through our Ramallah office to make sure that Palestinians are involved in this project too, because there's the surge of some 50,000 Palestinians here in the valley. Nature doesn't recognize any of these passports, any of these identities. We all need to be involved in this rehabilitation effort if we're to rehabilitate the river and bring climate resilience. The third
Gidon, excuse me, sorry to interrupt you. Just if you go back to that map for 1 second, we'll talk about it later, but just had a question about the map because I don't see the bottom of the scale down there, the legend. What are those yellow dots? Sheikh Hussein, Jordan Gateway.
So the yellow dots are existing. Well, this one's an existing crossing area where you.
Of course, that's a border crossing, right?
That's a border crossing from South Shuna down at the south to Jericho. There's an existing electricity link. So these two are two existing electricity, because there's also electricity links between the countries.
Okay, great, thanks.
The third pillar of the Green Blue Deal is moving forward Israeli-Palestinian water issues, and I want to recognize Dr. David Brooks from Ottawa in Canada, who I believe might be online here as a co-author together with Julie Trottier of a vision of how we can move forward on resolving Israeli-Palestinian water issues. This is something that David and Julie authored for Ecopeace back in 2010 and again 2012. Well, now this is needed more urgently than ever that we resolve water issues between our two peoples in order to build climate resilience. And what we need to understand is that water issues are basically being held hostage. Resolving water issues between Israelis and Palestinians is being held hostage to the fact that we haven't been able to resolve issues of Jerusalem or final borders or refugee or settlement issues. And there's no reason that those two issues should be held hostage to each other. Water back when the Oslo Accords was signed in 1905 in Oslo B, water was still a zero-sum game. There was no desalination. Desalination started in Israel only in 2005. And therefore, the fair sharing of water was a difficult thing to do because more water from Israel to the Palestinians would have been at Israel's expense. There would have been less water for farmers, a difficult issue to do anywhere in the world. But today, that's no longer the case. The water pie has tremendously increased, much due to Israel's leadership in the water sector, not only in desalination, but in Israel's leadership in treating sewage. In fact, that treated sewage today is more water than we ever pumped out of the Sea of Galilee, and about half the food in Israel is grown from treated sewage. So the water pie has incredibly grown. And the reason why water was difficult to resolve doesn't hold water, if I use that pun, today. And we can't afford to continue to see this situation. So this is in the West Bank. There's intermittent water supply. Communities, depending on where they are, will get water from the municipality once a week, once every 2 weeks. In the southern part of the West Bank, once a month, if you live south of Hebron in Yatta. No one's dying of thirst, but you only get water in a specific time. Every house has a tank, and most houses will run out of that municipal water and will have to order a tanker to get more water for basic water needs, but that can be 10 to 20 times the cost of municipal water. The situation in Gaza, which is here in the middle, is much worse because the quality of the groundwater that they have is just so saline and so polluted today that the 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza should only really be drinking desalinated water from existing small desalination plants. And it's a lose-lose because sewage is also being largely untreated throughout the West Bank, and until recently also in Gaza. And that's also an issue held hostage to the conflict that is a loss to both peoples. So at Ecopeace, we're calling to move forward, and here we have an example of success where through the efforts of the international community, investing $250 million in the building of 3 modern sewage treatment plants, but also largely to the advocacy efforts of Ecopeace by highlighting the lose-lose. So this is satellite imagery back from 2017 that shows, this speaks to about 108 million liters of sewage leaving Gaza every day, polluting their groundwater, but also flowing into the Mediterranean and being carried by the currents to Ashkelon and to Ashdod. Israel has a desalination plant in Ashkelon. At Ecopeace, we revealed the information that the desalination plant in Ashkelon was being intermittently closed because raw sewage cannot be used as the basis of our drinking water. Ashkelon represents 15% of our drinking water. Ashdod, a second desalination plant, another 15%. What we at Ecopeace were trying to show, and I think what every environmentalist understands, we can never disengage from our shared environment. And we have a shared interest to make sure that every one of us treats our sewage, deals with our sewage water so that we don't pollute scarce water, and that all of us have enough domestic water and water for agriculture to meet basic needs, and that under the climate crisis, this is needed more than ever. I can go into further details. Jay, you asked about the mayors of the River Jordan. So the fourth pillar of the Green Blue Deal, first pillar, water energy, second, Jordan River, third, moving forward on the fair sharing and the management of water issues between Israelis and Palestinians. The fourth pillar is all about education. And at Equipeace for close to 30 years now, we've been running programs in schools. These are Israeli, Palestinian, and Jordanian youth. We call them youth water trustees. On their shirts, you can see water has has no borders. Nature knows no borders. A theme that I think all of our environmental organizations use. We highlight that working together on these issues is not doing a favor. Sadly, there are extremists on all sides, on the Jewish Israeli side, on the Arab side, Palestinian or Jordanian, that accuse people that work with like-minded people on the other side as working for the other. At Equipeace, we highlight that cooperating over the environment is in the national interest of all of us in the region. And the work that's taking place with the youth is really what has led to these mayors. These are Israeli, Palestinian, and Jordanian mayors jumping into a clean stretch of the Jordan River, because through the work of the youth, they've come to understand that they're all losers. That the demise of the river just south of here is at the expense is to the expense of their communities, and therefore, they're literally standing here together and about to jump into the river and get wet, to make a statement, despite those that condemn them. At Equipeace, and this is my final slide, we have gone far. We've managed to present this to the UN Security Council twice at the invitation of two different presidents. So this is Nada, the Palestinian director of Equipeace. This is, at the time, the German president of the UN Security Council in New York. This is Yana, the Jordanian co-director of Equipeace, and myself. And we're here presenting. Last year, we were invited by Norway again to present the Green Blue Deal, a climate answer to build region-wide resilience, and through that, the piece that I think, the echo piece that we desperately need. Here we're standing with the foreign minister of Finland, also at the UN, that's become a real champion of the Green Blue Deal. And I also want to highlight here both the support of Sweden, which is has been a big supporter of Equipeace, Germany through foundations and its own government, but also the private individuals and foundations that have supported Equipeace over all of these close to 30 years. So I think, Jay, I'm ready to take some questions, expand on different issues. And I look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for an inspiring 45 minutes here so far. It's not to be taken for granted in these times in Israel. And you're, every time I talk to you, Gidon, I'm just inspired by the way you think about the environment. And, we all say it. I don't know how many times I've said it in my talks with people abroad. The environment knows no borders, nature knows no borders, birds know no borders, water knows no borders. But to live it the way you live it, have lived it for over 2 decades, and to really advance things. And it's so not to be taken for granted. I don't know, I don't think you exactly mentioned, and people might not know, but at the time of the Oslo Accords, there were set up, or there were supposed to be set up talks on all these thorny issues of Jerusalem and refugees and land use and everything, and water was one of them. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, water is the only thing that's still going, and most of them didn't even last a year or a couple of years. And look, you're still here, and you're still a tripartite organization, and working now with the Gulf states, and it's, I don't know, I may be able to fall asleep tonight thinking about it.
Thank you, Jay. So indeed, yes, lots of issues were called final status issues. So there was Jerusalem as a final status issue, refugees,
right of return. Refugees, right.
That's refugees, borders and security, settlements, and water. These were 5 issues that were seen as difficult to resolve. And as I try to highlight, water back then was difficult to resolve. Water is no longer a difficult issue. And that's largely due to Israel's leadership in the field. And that leadership can help us improve the situation for both peoples, because failing to do this, and I think that's our message, we're not interested in the blame game. We're interested in moving forward. How can we improve the reality on the ground? How can we build trust by using the environment, by working through the environment? And hopefully through that, the trust and improved lives, we can build beyond that, beyond the environment.
Absolutely. Very inspiring. So I have one comment which you can relate to as well, comment on, feel free to. And then I actually have a question of my own and a quick question of my own, and we'll get into some of the questions. I'll give you a highlight. The first question I'm going to ask from the group here relate to the Dead Sea. And is this going to solve the catastrophic issues around the Dead Sea? And do we anticipate any future environmental issues based on this whole water reengineering? But before we get to that, I just want to say on behalf of SPNI that we, have opposed solar fields and that little pieces of the Negev that are still left as open spaces. You mentioned half the Negev is close to the military, and I think more than half of the other half are nature reserves. And then when you take out the cities and the villages and stuff, we're left with very little open space. And we're concerned about harming the biodiversity in our desert, and we hope, therefore, and I don't think studies have been done sufficiently yet to find those places in Jordan which are rightly, closer to the population centers in Israel than perhaps the Negev is. The same way the water, our desalination plants on the coast are closer than Aqaba and Eilat. But in that vein, and since the closer the better when it comes to creating solar electricity, we're very much pushing for solar on rooftops, and believe it can perhaps supply upwards of a quarter or more of Israel's total energy needs. And so that is very important, and we're just keeping an eye on what's going to be going on in the Jordanian desert as well in terms of those solar fields. So that's just one comment I wanted to make.
And we agree with that comment. So we think that all sides need to maximize existing utilization of land, not only rooftops, but that there is solar agro, agricultural fields perhaps, and we need to keep pristine land untouched as much as possible, and clearly that applies to Jordan as well. But the scale of Jordan is just simply vast compared to Israel, and therefore there's more opportunity. We're certainly the first to insist that impact assessments and the studies be undertaken to identify the desert areas in Jordan, particularly on the eastern side, further east of the King's Highway or Amman. That those that know the area know the area well, where the biodiversity is the lowest, where the heat intensity is also the highest, and therefore the renewable energy production can be the most efficient.
Right. Great, and we'll get into the Dead Sea in 1 second, but just a quick question, and I should know this. Aren't we going to be building a desalination plant in Aqaba in the Gulf of Eilat that will supply a load in Israel is already 30% covered by solar electricity during the daytime, but I thought that there's going to be a solar powered plant in the Gulf down there. Supply electricity, is that not, I mean, desalinated water?
So Israel, currently, desalinates groundwater in the Arava Valley for Eilat. Jordan is planning to build a very large, in addition to the water that Jordan will buy from Israel. Jordan is looking to build a 300 million cubic meter desalination plant in Aqaba. And I think we all need to be worried about the brine, be it in the Gulf of Aqaba, Aqaba and Eilat, where there's these unique coral reefs, but also in the Mediterranean. And here too, we're always trying to be ahead of the curve and look at developing technologies. Here we've been a company out of California has reached out to us with solutions that they're proposing, and it's to use the brine as a resource rather than dumping it as a waste back into either the Gulf of Aqaba or the Mediterranean. And this company has come to Israel now twice. We've also introduced them to the Jordanians. Mekorot, we hope, will enter a pilot project with them. And what they're proposing is that the brine can be utilized to capture carbon. So we have a double impact. We have a double benefit, both carbon reduction and stopping the dumping of brine into our oceans, which is harmful in an accumulated fashion. So we're hopeful that a pilot will be launched starting in Eilat. And we hope that this can become the solution for Aqaba as well, rather than dumping the brine into the Gulf. But we also need to appreciate how water scarce the region is. Jordan's capital currently gets 8 hours of water a week. That's more than 4 million people are getting municipal water for just 8 hours a week. Every house, like on the Palestinian side, stores water. And Jordan is predicting even further water scarcity because of the climate crisis. So it's clear that Jordan has no other alternative than to desalinate. We think that the water energy deal, this Project Prosperity, is a wonderful way of creating healthy interdependencies. We buy renewable from them, they buy water from us, but no one wants to be completely dependent on the other. So I think we also need to understand that Jordan will want to build, and Jordan will move forward on its own desalination plant in Aqaba. We need to make sure that the technological solutions are in place so that desalination doesn't continue to harm marine ecosystems, but becomes a resource. And that's what we're trying to promote.
Okay, I will just say that we haven't seen much detectable harm from the desalination in the Mediterranean. Just recently we had a trip in the country and we heard that again. I know the Gulf of Mediterranean is a closed area and it's shallow, and the Gulf is even more so, plus it has the coral reef. So I haven't heard about that at all, but either way, this is fascinating technology, very interesting to hear about. Someone asked if it would be used as a feedstock as well, the brine perhaps, but I guess we'll let the scientists look at that, and that's a good idea, and hopefully they can bring it back to California, because the western half of America is getting to the point where they have to turn the taps off. And what you talk about in terms of the water intermittency on the West Bank and Gaza, and even in Jordan, even in the modern capital of Amman, modern-ish, it's scary, and it really makes you feel as an Israeli how privileged we are that we don't even have educational advertisements anymore telling us to turn the taps off, because water is like a bounty here, and it's incredible. We shouldn't take it for granted.
So I agree. I mean, I wish that we would have those advertisements to still conserve water, because of course we're using energy to produce that. But without the desalination and without the treating, Israel's leadership in treating sewage and reusing for agriculture, we would be similar to the rest of the region, because whether it's Israel, whether it's the Palestinian territories, whether it's Jordan, whether it's Lebanon, whether it's Syria, whether it's even Iraq, the rest of the region has intermittent water supply. Water is not supplied 24/7 because of water scarcity, management issues, and between Israelis and Palestinians, for Palestinians because of the conflict.
Gidon, this you just said reminds me, I was going to mention before, do we also have a conflict between SPNI and Ecopeace? Because you showed me in Uja that they collect rainwater on roofs in public buildings, which, by the way, as we know, is illegal in Israel. Rainwater does not belong to the place it falls. It belongs to the government, if I recall my lesson from you. But so can solar panels and rainwater collection coexist on rooftops?
Of course. I mean, when it rains on the solar panel, it'll still
falls right off.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it'll collect to the roof and use the same drainage system. It can also be reused. That water can be collected for drinking purposes or for the garden. So yeah, I mean, I think that rainwater harvesting is something that we should be promoting throughout the region. It does exist in the Palestinian and Jordanian areas. As you said, it's not legal in Israel, but we think it should, because again, if we can collect the water locally, then we don't need to move water utilizing lots of energy from place to place. So there are environmental benefits in rainwater harvesting, and those that live in the southwest of the United States, such as Arizona, know it very well. It's a very legal and common thing.
Cool and interesting. The Dead Sea, what's going to happen there? Gosh, I mean, say something optimistic.
Yeah, the Dead Sea. I mean, this is a crime, an environmental crime that we as a region have committed. The Dead Sea has lost a third of its surface area. It used to be 80 kilometers in length. It's now only 50. And it's dropping by over a meter in depth every year. Those of you in the audience that have visited Kibbutz En Gedi, if you'd visited Kibbutz En Gedi 15 years ago, you would look out and turn south and you wouldn't see the end of the Dead Sea. Today, you see the end of the Dead Sea already at Kibbutz En Gedi. When you stand on Masada today, this palace fortress that King Herod built 2,000 years ago. He builds it as a palace on the shores of the Dead Sea, looking out to the Dead Sea. Today, you see nothing but dry land in front of you. That whole area has completely dried up, and sinkholes, more than 7,000 holes have opened up where the earth has collapsed into the demise of the Dead Sea on all sides, in the north, in the south, on the east, on the west. And there are two reasons for the demise of the Dead Sea. About 60 to 70% of the demise is due to the Jordan River no longer flowing. And half of the Jordan River flow is taken by us Israelis, and the other half are taken by Syrians and Jordanians. We can do better than that, and we need to bring some of that. We understand we're never going to bring all of the water back down the Jordan River, but here too we've done a study at Ecopeace, and we recognize to bring back the biodiversity of the Jordan River, we need about 400 million cubic meters of water to flow down that river again and reach the Dead Sea. So that's one of our, that water could be from a desalinated source. It perhaps could even be other sources of water. More research needs to be done. The other reason for the demise of the Dead Sea. And here, there's real issues that we can move forward right now, is the industry, the mineral extraction industry on the Israeli side and on the Jordanian side. These industries are literally moving water from the natural Dead Sea to man-made evaporation ponds in the south. When you stay in hotels on the Israeli side of Ein Bokek, you're no longer staying on the shores of the Dead Sea. You're on the bank of pond number 5 of the industry. And these evaporation ponds do what they say. They evaporate the water in order to extract the minerals. Israel is currently in the process of issuing a new concession for the mineral extraction industry. And I think here, Equipeace, SPNI, and all of the environmental organizations have one view here. Every cubic meter of water that the industry take, they need to be responsible to bring it back. Otherwise, they shouldn't be allowed to operate. You know, this is a national treasure, a regional treasure, an international treasure, and no private sector, no one industry should be allowed to so demise the sea. These two mineral extraction industries together are responsible for 40% of the drop in the sea level. We have an opportunity under the renewal of the concession, and here we're Equipeace, SPNI, all of the environmental organizations are trying to work together to make sure that any concession be required that the industry pays for the water and the industry returns back every cubic meter of water that it utilizes in the mineral process, in the mineral extraction process.
Okay, thank you. Listen, we just got a couple minutes left, a couple more questions, a couple questions about Gaza. One of them is there any consideration to build either desalination plant there and or wastewater treatment plants, or is that already in process? And someone else asks, you know, will more power to Gaza mean more rockets into Israel? And I think that's a
legitimate question. So firstly, let me speak to that, but in both questions at once. So today there are 3 modern sewage treatment plants in Gaza. Close to 70% of the sewage is treated, while literally, you know, just back in 2018, none of the sewage was treated. It's a game changer. And one of the reasons why the sewage treatment plants were not being built was because cement is needed to build sewage treatment plants. You can't build them without cement. And the Israeli military had evidence saying that Hamas was stealing cement to build tunnels to attack Israel. And therefore, the position of the Israeli military until 2016 was that cement doesn't go into Gaza because that's a security risk. And what we at Equipeace tried to do is we understand the legitimate security interests, and they are legitimate, but not building sewage treatment plants also creates threats and risks of water security. The closure of the Ashkelon desalination plant is a risk to 15% of Israel's water security. Ashkelon and Ashdod desalination plant is 30%. The risk of pandemic disease, cholera and typhoid, they also